Namaskar and welcome to Weekly Global Insights, episode 323. Because of a technical difficulty, my video is not working, but my audio is working fine. We regret the technical disturbance. A shout out to our viewers to like this program so it can reach its maximum potential. Today is Friday, the 18th of March, and here are the main points. Russia, Ukraine, Europe developments. Russia says it has organized two payments on its debt obligations, avoiding the default scenario. No formal confirmation from the recipients yet. Russia starts to seize leased planes that are foreign owned. Putin says that Russia has withstood sanctions and people must prepare for inflation and unemployment. Siddhaji, namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel. Regret the delay, sir.
No problem. Good morning, Sriji, and good morning to everybody. But I'm glad that our program is getting underway.
Your thoughts on what is happening in Russia and Ukraine, sir? They barely avoided default, but the recipients haven't still confirmed that they have got the payments from Russia.
Yeah, I think that the first and foremost is that there appears to be a payment. There's a lot of uncertainty around what exactly was paid, but there is almost certainty around that they appear to have, escaped the default situation. That's the good news, to the markets. As far as the local economic situation is concerned, as Vladimir Putin himself has stated in his address to the nation, which is namely that they're in for hard times. Inflation is going to be high. Ruble has been depreciated significantly, and there's also an exodus of companies. As a result, there is a looming unemployment, but the government and the nation will prevail. That seems to be the message to the Russian people. He's still very belligerent and very clear in terms of what he wants in his address to the global leaders.
And Putin speaks with his Turkish counterpart Erdogan and desires a direct meeting with Zelensky for a peaceful resolution to the war. Ukraine stands firm on the border agreed in 1991. Post the collapse of former Soviet Union, and that includes Crimea and eastern provinces. In other words, Ukraine seems to be hardening its stand. Russian missiles strike western Ukrainian city of Lviv, Lviv, in the early hours of Friday. Sridharji, this is now, for the most part, it was from the south and from the east of Ukraine. Now the theater of operation seems to have widened.
Well, clearly, I think that he's expanding, and he's also bringing in an element of surprise because in the traditional airspace, he seems to have the anti-aircraft equipment that now is in possession of Ukraine seems to be working. So he's targeting areas which is available to him, which also gives him the element of surprise. Is naturally, there is an element of frustration in terms of the lack of progress. So he needs to show progress, and which is what you are witnessing with the most recent attack in Lviv, which is apparently a military base or military air training facility in the western side of Ukraine. It's very interesting development within the context, Sriji.
And German newspaper Bild has reported that Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov plane returned to Russia while on a flight to China. It is unclear whether Chinese officials refused to meet Lavrov or if Russian president ordered his return. This is really, really strange. Russia vetoes UN resolution on humanitarian crisis, reflecting the irrelevance of UN to discuss major global issues. Let's first take a look at the Russian foreign minister's flight to China. That was supposed to have taken place, I suppose, ahead of the Biden-Xi meeting, right? And now he has turned back.
Well, I think there are two significant messages. One, the meeting between Jack Sullivan and the Chinese officials that took place in Rome, where I think a clear message appears to have been delivered. There's also been a precursor to that with Antony Blinken and his counterpart in China, making it very clear that any Chinese actions, would be construed as against the international norms and will be held against China. Now, it's not this is U.S. position. The question is whether the Chinese are willing to listen to it is an entirely different matter. But the fact that Lavrov's plane did not land and or did not reach Beijing, returned, whether it is at the request of Mr. Putin or whether it is at the request of whether because the Chinese officials did not accede to the request remains a mystery. But the way this morning, as we came into the show, that Lavrov is reacting, he's clearly frustrated man. One of his most profound statements is that the 1991 Soviet Union separation or the border rebordering is over. If West still is persuading the path, then they are in the path of delusion. That's one statement. The other statement that has come out from him is that United States and the West can no longer act as the sheriff and behave accordingly. It's a new world order that we are living in, and there's a new set of rules. Now, this is what Lavrov is saying. Now, just to go back to the earlier point, apparently 8 conditions or 8 points were laid out by Vladimir Putin to Mr. Erdogan as a precondition or as a condition for the termination of the war. I just don't know whether Zelensky or the West is going to agree to any, to some of the conditions. Conditions include Crimea, they may. Eastern provinces being, given the independence or the sovereignty. Making Russian language as one of the important languages not to be replaced within the constitution. Then, of course, they call it as the denazification of Ukraine. Never to fight, never to join NATO, never to be a security threat, etc. So I think some of these things is not going to fly. Ukraine is a sovereign nation. Perhaps somebody has to remind Vladimir Putin equally that the West has no interest in going back to the reassembling of the old Soviet Union and the old, communistic method of forming these federations. So I think this is now getting into, I believe, a very aggressive stage. What happens today, I think in shortly, maybe the meeting has just started between Mr. Biden and Mr. Xi Jinping, will set the context for what is to come. Mr. Putin has also spoken with Scholz, the German chancellor, and has made it very clear that it is Ukraine which is walking away from his proposals, not him. But I think Scholz must have told him, I'm sorry, there has to be a win-win and this war has to be terminated. There has to be a win-win situation. You concede some and, Zelensky concedes some, and we move forward. So I think we are now getting into, I believe the next week is going to be a very crucial week in terms of how this thing is going to shape out, Sriji.
Sridharji, I read somewhere that a British minister has said that the Russian offensive appears to be stalled completely on all the fronts. And Putin, on the contrary, says that Russia has the might to put enemies in their places and reject the US war crime allegations. Looking at all this stuff, how far do you think Putin can last out? People are saying that he's days away from default. He appears to have made some payments, and now he's asking China to help out in aid as well as in arms. And I think that's what Biden is trying to cut off, isn't it?
I think Biden is trying to cut off 3 important aspects. One is explicit support of the Chinese to the continued persecution of the war. I think that's the first and foremost request. Please come out and say explicitly it's time that Russia walks out of Ukraine and stops the war and comes to a negotiated settlement. Lo and behold, having said that, one of the 2 judges who dissented the ICJ ruling on this dissolution of the war was a Chinese judge in the ICJ panel. I think the second, which is far more important, is Russia is running out of liquidity. So credit supply is what they're looking for. So that's the second thing that Biden will be telling China not to provide that liquidity. I think the third is apparently the military supplies are running out. Whatever I know I've seen some of the comments of very harsh, comments around what they call as the Western message. But the fact is that, this is supposed to be the world's most powerful army. Ukraine was a sub-territory within the Russian Federation. after 4 to 4.5 weeks of the war, Russia has shown nothing by way of except, attacking various sets of facilities. Because it's Obama and Biden turned a blind eye, the Crimea remained in his possession up until now. He kept quiet for 4 years during Mr. President Trump's tenure. He has come with his guns blazing. It's not that this NATO membership was not in question at that point of time. It is not that the EU membership of Ukraine was not in consideration at that point of time. It was not that the security issues did not flare up at that point of time. It's not that the Eastern nations tried to create a security umbrella around Poland and the Baltic states. But lo and behold, now today it is a big issue for Mr. Vladimir Putin, and he has launched this war. So to me, Sriji, that what the British are saying, or the British intelligence are saying, appears to be true, though we don't have, this is the fog of war, that Russia has not made any significant progress in prosecuting a specific war. They probably underestimated the tenacity of the resistance that is coming from the Ukrainians.
Excuse me. Ukraine asks Japan for satellite data amid Russian invasion. Excuse me. Satellites operated by commercial operators and Japanese government must approve this. And Britain is going to deploy detect and destroy 𝙒𝙬𝙤𝙦 missile defense system in Poland. So even as people are supplying arms and ammunition to Ukraine, they're also fortifying some of the Eastern Bloc nations that are NATO members, isn't it, Sitaji?
It is. The Eastern nations, which are NATO members, are being strengthened. They are being given not only the what you call surveillance, as well as Britain calls it as detect and blast. There is also new set of equipment that is being contemplated from providing a shield to the Baltic states from any aerial missiles, whether it is cruise missiles or whether from air-launched missiles. There's protection being contemplated. Remember, we mentioned to you that the NATO has activated the response force. The exact moves of Putin are unpredictable. He is threatening a number of nations, whether he is going to move to Georgia, whether he's going to move to Sweden, whether he's going to threaten Finland, whether he's going to go to Moldova. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty around what exactly his actions are that he is contemplating.
Sanctions continue, with Japan, Australia, and Britain imposing more sanctions on institutions and individuals. South Africa becomes one of the first nations to come forward and support Russian action with a statement from its president. Uganda says it supports Chinese model of diplomacy than the Western model. So this is all basically drumming up support, isn't it?
It is. I think if you recall, we discussed it perhaps offline. There seems to be some undercurrent of BRICS here. If you take a look at Brazil was critical, notwithstanding supporting the resolution. Russia is at the centerpiece. India has abstained from and urging, the path of diplomacy. And South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, has come in the open and said, I don't accept the West and NATO's approach. Russia is under threat. So, what Russia is doing is the correct thing. So you are seeing the first set of African nations come out of the block. Everybody knows Uganda has a very strong relationship. Many of the generals of the Uganda are trained in the Chinese military academy. So you have Uganda coming to the forefront and saying it believes in the Chinese model. So is there some kind of little political upmanship going on between China and Russia as well, which China is trying to persuade Russia to say, hey, you follow me, my model, then I'll support you rather than your own. So there's interesting political developments and side plays that are going on for these things to be making mainstream headlines, Sriji.
And viewers, if you want to know more about how African dictators' children have studied in China and what happens. There was an episode with Elmer Yuan that talks about it in some detail. So I encourage you to take a look at that. In US news, scandals galore with billions and billions of dollars in bogus payments. Feds have just recovered less than 1% of 163 billion bogus unemployment benefit payments. As a matter of fact, Sridharji, I want to go on record here saying that some of the stimulus checks have not come to me, and the government keeps writing to me saying that you haven't encashed your check, and then if I don't get the card, how can I encash it? But they keep telling me that you should have received it. So it's one of those things where I can see it but I can't touch it.
Well, I think this is whenever you have extraordinary flow of cash dispersed from a government agency, doesn't matter which government it is, as sophisticated as United States or as less sophisticated as some of the less developed nations' governments, there is bound to be rampant corruption, and there's no different in United States. We did close to $6 trillion of disbursements. $150 billion is a drop in the ocean. I have no idea how. Officially, we have reported the amount of money that has left United States under the pretext of COVID, even to fund some of the foreign countries and their own respective programs, ethical or otherwise. So the $150 billion of unemployment benefits, how do you distribute unemployment benefits and to whom it has gone when it has not been accounted properly, you can see. By the way, there is also, the House had passed a request and resolution from the new border czar to report on what the hell is going on. He's yet to come, and in the meanwhile, we are completely distracted by the Russia-Ukraine situation.
Sir, the progressives are making noise again. They have submitted a list of demands for executive order actions by Biden, including combating climate crisis, racial justice, and so on. There is a separate discourse being run by the same progressives on illegal immigration matters, including detention, deportation, and fast tracking. And more interestingly, news coming down the pipeline that Mr. Khanna thinks he can run for president.
Well, Khanna is a very smart man. He's from California. He's got plenty of access to
capital. Sir. Smartness and being California are not mutually exclusive, sir.
I'm just making an observation. So my observation that is, which is namely, it's from California. California has liberal intellectuals. It has powered the U.S. economy. The top four companies by market cap are from California. So you have to give it to the Californians, Sriji, in terms of what they have done in the last 10, 20 years. As far as Khanna is concerned, of course, he has always entertained and he wanted to be an aspirant. Was disappointed. Probably he wasn't one of the vice presidential nominees. Of course, you know him too, and we all know him. And, he's quite eloquent in terms of his engagement in his skills. Now, as far as these progressives are concerned, they are slighted. I think we are covering tomorrow the U.S. budget, where we will look at some of the numbers. Obviously, the $1.5 trillion stimulus, which we touched on on Wednesday's show, did not have anything for the climate, so they're a little bit upset. It didn't have much for their social welfare programs. They're a bit upset, and they're also upset that the normalization or the fast tracking of the illegal immigrants has not happened. They're also upset that some of the social welfare benefit programs have not been accommodated in this new budget or the additional stimulus that went in just recently.
And House votes to cease all trade relations with Russia and most favored nation status. U.S. Defense Secretary rejects Ukraine request for a no-fly zone. Now, this is again a sticking point. I think if they implement and if they enforce a no-fly zone, that automatically means that the NATO countries are at war with Russia, isn't it, Sridharji?
It is. I think that basically the no-fly zone implies that you are getting into war. And usually, whether people accept it or not, they try to get a UN resolution. And, usually Russia or China, they don't veto, they abstain. So when you abstain, not veto, the resolution gets passed. That's how the no-fly zones were implemented in Iraq, and no-fly zones were implemented in parts of southern Syria. during the war. So in this instance, this is not a declared war. This is an illegal occupation which resulted into a war. Miss Ukraine can shout from top of the world, but the world is not going to accede. So they're trying to get as much as possible equipment, aid, and other kind of relief so that they can self-defend themselves, and the world condemning the actions. But beyond that, you're not going to see either West or NATO, which includes NATO is considered as part of the West, is interfering and getting into the act of war, Sriji.
And in Asia news, South Korea daily COVID cases hit a record of over 600,000 as South Korea total cases crossed 8.25 million and Vietnam at 6.82 million. China begins to lift lockdown in Shenzhen. That's perhaps one of the best news that I can think of, because this is the new variant, Delta Cron or something like that. Delta Cron?
Delta Cron, yeah.
So go ahead, sir. So suddenly now South Korea and Vietnam are finding a surge. How does one correlate these things as to how the waves happen, sir?
No, there's only one. There are only two reasons. One is there has not been complete shutdown of factories in Vietnam. Vietnam is densely populated with industrial houses, which creates the room for the spread of the virus. As far as Korea is concerned, it is more, they believe the influx of the tourists, they have not fully banned I don't know how the enforcement is happening in terms of managing, monitoring, as well as controlling the COVID streams. But having said that, every country which has seen this abnormal, blips in the cases. So all you can say is that they were caught, off guard, and suddenly the cases has risen in Korea. That can be the only plausible explanation that can be given. Is Korea was not one of the countries in the initial first two waves impacted. Same with Vietnam, but you're beginning to see that most of the Asian countries seems to have contained. And again, China, you saw this spurt. They attributed that to the tourists coming from Hong Kong, because Hong Kong have had a high incidence of the COVID cases. It's conceivable that probably is very similar in Korea as well.
There is also a growing chorus among Asian analysts that China must drop Russia now and align with the world order. Chinese and Russian judge dissent at ICJ against the Russian invasion ruling. We talked about this. China to pay costs if it aids Russia, US Secretary of State Blinken tells his Chinese counterpart. And as we talked about it, Xi and Biden are going to be meeting as we speak. Perhaps the meeting has started. We have to wait and see how that plays out. Chinese carrier sails through Taiwan Strait hours before the Xi-Biden call, clearly sending a message. So what is China trying to do? Being the next Russia, Sridharji?
I think that basically Xi Jinping is telling, Mr. Biden, you are not the sheriff here in town, okay? I'm here to listen to you as a courtesy, but, I will make my decision as I feel appropriate. I think that's the message. And he's also probably he's going to tell Biden, don't try and play the same game that you played in Ukraine, because Taiwan is very different. In Russia is saying Ukraine was an injustice done by West in 1991, 1994, whereas Ukraine is the one which goes back in time. So Taiwan was always part of China. So you're going to have this very interesting discussion. But having said that, there is a growing set of voices notably in Asia, intellectuals which are telling that China must step back. China is much more a formidable economy, as well as it is viewed as the next superpower, and they would like to see a China emerge as a responsible superpower and not take antagonistic positions by virtue of a vast and expansive ecosystem, both on the imports and export side, that China is part of, unlike Russia. That is the message. And China may be, thinking about that rather than any perceptive threat from Mr. Biden, Sree from the United States.
And Japan is working towards 6G lead with global standards backed by NEC, Toyota, and other firms. Shenzhen overtakes New York as the home for the most number of billionaires. And in India news, India will always stand with Sri Lanka, asserts PM Modi to Sri Lanka Finance Minister 𝙒𝙑 Rajapaksa after signing the much-needed 1 billion credit package. I think the relations between India and Sri Lanka are on the mend, would you say?
I would say completely. Plus, I think that this $1 billion, they started with some 100 million or so, but I think they've made their way. It's $1 billion. Their foreign exchange reserves are depleted. I think it's less than 1 week in terms of their ability to meet their import bills. India has not only extended this 1 billion credit line, but has also offered to support them in the event of an adversity. And they will be probably providing, some kind of correlatory support as Sri Lanka negotiates with IMF to augment a credit package further to what India has proposed. Clearly, I think that this is one of the strategic moves that India has made. So it's got Sri Lanka, it's got Maldives. Now it needs to slowly bring, some of the other nations into the neighborhood into its fold.
And India's merchandise exports is at 300 billion as of March 14 and will cross 400 billion, tells India's Commerce Minister 𝗣𝘂𝘀𝘀𝘀 Goyal for fiscal year 2022. Reliance Industries is likely to avoid purchasing Russian fuels due to Western sanctions on Moscow. Reliance has acquired Ural's crude straight-run oil fuel from Russia. We just want to understand this, sir. How is Ural's okay and Russia not okay?
No, actually, there is an energy company called Vitol, which sources oil from 50 different nations. They are a global entity, and they have not sourced this post-sanctions. This is all bought earlier, and these are the supplies that are being received. Vital sources from a number of countries. They have a range of capabilities in various locations, from refining to storage to logistics to shipping, etc. And they're also one of the large traders. So this Ural oil, which is very similar to Brent and WTI, West Texas Intermediate, is a crude, is an oil that is sourced from the Volga western region of Russia and the Siberian region. And it has both a blend of what you call as a heavy oil and a light oil. And it requires refining, very similar to the WTI or the Brent crude. Except that if you have a very good refining capacity, then you can acquire it at a lower cost, refine it, and your effective cost of processed oil fuel is much cheaper than what you buy the pure grade crude from the markets. So what India has acquired and is from Vital, first Indian Oil, I think, and then the second now Hindustan, the next petroleum company seems to have acquired, and it's available at a cheaper price. So they have not violated and beaten the sanctions. And this is the little technical thing, which is why Jen Psaki mentioned, no, India has not violated any specific sanctions. So therefore, I think this is the context behind this acquisition. As far as the Reliance is concerned, Reliance has, is a global player. They process and refine a huge amount of U.S. crude, especially the Brent, and they not only export it back to United States, but it is extensively used within India. Again, this is a data point which people forget, that the amount of India is the second largest, buyer of the U.S. crude at about $8 billion. $14 billion worth of crude is obtained from Iraq. Iraq is number one. United States is number two.
And PM Modi called South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol on Thursday to discuss bilateral areas of cooperation and further deepen the strategic partnership. India-South Korea bilateral trade is at 12 billion, and both nations are working towards a target of 50 billion by 2030. I mean, that's a steep target, sir. 8 billion, no, 38 billion in next 8 years.
I think what India is looking for is these new corridors, and you will begin to see three specific areas of development. One is the broader consumer electronics, where you are going to find many things manufactured by Samsung, therefore Korea, in India. They are also going to expand their steel and mining operations. If you remember that last 20, 30 years, POSCO has had footprint, but they've had a number of challenges. And I think the third area you are going to see is the Korean footprint in the semiconductor industry. So India has big aspirations in semiconductor. You may see Korea playing a part. Plus, Korea is not a big foreign direct investor into the industrial complexes or the ecosystem, startup ecosystem of India. So that's another area which they are looking at in terms of bilateral cooperation.
Kishida arrives in India on Saturday for bilateral meetings with PM Modi and has Quad partners to discuss Ukraine. Japan has been far more stringent on its sanctions. India-Japan bilateral trade is at 20 billion, and Japan is the 12th largest trading partner and the 4th largest investor in India. Sridharji, this is good news that Japan is also looking at India much more closely. For instance, I think the bullet train was almost completely funded by Japan.
Yep.
Between Ahmedabad and Mumbai.
Yes, the bullet train project was funded, but everybody forgets that when Modi ji launched the National Infrastructure Project, almost close to somewhere between $400 to $500 billion of long-term credit for the infrastructure project was given by Japan. Japan it grows at less than 1%. In fact, it's probably in some instances, from some quarters, it's also negative. So just at 1%, that of 1% credit yield has enormous impact on the Japanese GDP. So Japan is willing to provide huge amount of concessional long-term credits with guaranteed payments to India. So you may see Japanese footprint not only in the infrastructure, which is going to be one of the big growing domains, but also some of the MSME segments. And I think we covered this in one of the Global Insights, if I remember correctly, that the manufacturer, one of the Japanese banks has invested $400 million in the startup ecosystem. Japan is investing a lot of money in India's startup ecosystem. That's where the number 4 ranking comes from.
And UK Foreign Secretary Elizabeth Truss will visit India later this month to hold discussions with India on bilateral partnerships and the Russia-Ukraine war. So Dominic is gone. Now this is a new foreign minister, isn't it, sir?
She was in EU. She is a very aggressive as well as, with a lot of forethought and vision. So I think it's going to be very interesting. And it's a tough negotiator. She was one of the Brexit negotiators. So it's going to be very interesting. She's coming down not only to discuss the FTA, but I believe very much the Ukraine-Russia is going to be on the top of the agenda if it is not resolved by then.
And in the markets, the S&P futures fall slightly as markets try to finish the best week since November 2020. Oil surges with fears of fresh shortages as Brent drops 109 and inching higher. And nickel prices dropped 12% in global markets. I want to touch upon the nickel prices. This was supposed to be an export from Russia. Has the world found a new source, sir?
I think what you're seeing is that the world is accepting that it must shift to an alternate. So when there is a sudden dip in the demand, the prices come down. That's one. The second is there are always players in the market who are going to short the prices, especially when you are in the middle of the sanctions. I'm not suggesting that is the case, but that may very well be one of the reasons why you're seeing the price dip. But there is very clear recalibration that is going on, recognizing that these sanctions are long-term implications for Russia, which they have not clearly understood as yet.
Thank you very much, Sridharji. Viewers, I've been looking at the number of people who are subscribers who are watching our programs, and interestingly, it is 1:1. That means every other watcher of YouTube videos and PGurus is not a subscriber, which means that if some of you jump and become subscribers, there is no reason why we can't scale the 250,000 mark. That's a big landmark, and we would love for you to be subscribers so you don't have to come seeking new videos from us. The notification will come to you. So hopefully you'll consider subscribing to our channel and propelling us forward. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel again, and send the link to your family and friends. We are working very hard to bring you latest news, a 360-degree view of the world. And also don't forget to click on the bell button. Sridharji, have a great weekend. We'll again talk tomorrow. We'll have one segment tomorrow and one more perhaps a little bit later. Back again next Monday for the Global Insight, sir.
Thank you. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you on the 2 short episodes that we would be covering during the course of the weekend.
Thank you very much.